Hello everyone and welcome back to SGTV. So today we're going to be talking about mistakes. And as everyone knows, no matter what job or profession you're in, everyone out there makes mistakes. Most of us will own up to them and most of us should do the right thing and learn from them. So as we know in the electrical industry, mistakes are going to be made, but they can also be dangerous. So we're bringing on one of our favourite guests, Mr. Dave Savery. Say hello, Dave.
Hello there.
It's good to have you back on the show, Dave.
Yeah, it's good to be back, old chap, and I do like the intro. They're one of our favourite guests.
Yeah. I'm going to have all the other guests now saying why aren't I the favourite? You're all favourites. But so today, Dave, I want to be talking to you about SPARKY mistakes.
The word mistakes comes into it and you think, oh, we'll go to Dave for that. Yeah, those.
So I'm going to ask you, first of all, are there any mistakes you've made in your electrical career from training to where you are now that stand out for you?
I don't think there's anything that I look back on from my early days where I think, oh, I didn't do that right, or I wouldn't have done it that way these days, or anything like that, because since the beginning I was always as conscientious as I could be that what I was doing was right, and I'd research it as much as I can. And I mean, these days it's obviously a lot easier because we're so sort of been doing it for so long that you know where you are with most jobs, unless it's something you haven't come across before, and you can just sort of get out there and battle on. But in the earlier days, there were certainly a few sleepless nights where I'd be there thinking, right, I've got this job tomorrow, or this job coming up where I've got to picture myself on site doing this. How am I going to do this? What's going to trip me up? What do I need to know about? What am I unsure of that I need to research? What regulations do I need to be looking up, and all that sort of stuff, to try and make sure that it was always done in the right way, or a way that I could justify or be happy with. And that's not to say, obviously, that I've never made mistakes. I'm sure I have, and I know I have in some places, but never anything where I look back and think, oh, yeah, I got away with that with the skin of my teeth, or I didn't do that right, or like I say, I wouldn't do it like that these days, or anything like that. It's always been something to try and get right from the start. I think when it comes to mistakes, most of the ones that I've been on the receiving end of have been things that have happened that were perhaps beyond our control, or that were pure accidents, that sort of thing. The perhaps most expensive one springing to mind being a kitchen we were working on. I had a labourer that I had subbed out for knocking holes in walls, and I had Nigel near course. And then two things went wrong on that site, actually. I've forgotten about that. So one of them was that the labourer got a bit heavy-handed in sinking a box into the wall for an isolator, a cooker isolator, and actually managed to knock the plaster off the other side, which cheered the homeowner up no end. He was a bit...
I can imagine, yeah.
Moody chap to begin with, to be fair. Oh, not sure what that was. Bit of a moody chap to begin with, to be fair. So that didn't sit very well. But then when we would fitted out the kitchen, I noticed it just had this halogen hob in that the kitchen fitters had put in. And when we finished at the end of the day, there was a big scratch across it, one of these glass halogen hobs. And like, was that us? And honestly, don't know if it was or not. We know we put a cardboard box on top of it, which obviously ought not to have scratched it. But I can't be sure that there wasn't a bit of grit or brick or whatever that just got underneath something and got scored across it, something like that. So I had to go to the homeowner and say, you know, that new hob, was there a scratch on it at the start of the day? And he said no, of course. And I'm like, well, there is now. So that was me in the hole for a new hob. I think the important thing when something like that happens, though, obviously it's a hit and it's a pain and you're losing out financially on the job, but I think you've got to own up to these things. I don't think it's wise to try and make out that it wasn't you, or if you're pretty sure that you're the only guys in the room and you've done it, then the only way to sort of maintain your reputation is to make good on anything like that. So between those two problems of me having to pay for a plasterer to sort out the damaged wall and having to cover the cost of a replacement hob, obviously I could take away the old hob, and I managed to resell it into a rental environment where the appearances weren't too problematic. But you know, that all had an effect on sucking out some of the profits of that job. But I remember one of my the builder I used to work with, one of the builders I used to work with, I remember him getting called in by a client because they said to him, "Oh, that new bathroom you put in, well, there's a great big chunk out the bottom of the bath." And he went and had a look, and he was like, "Well, I don't remember causing that damage." And then he looked up and saw that the Sparky that had come in subsequently that the customer had appointed had put new downlights in above the bath. And he was like, "Well, that's it then, isn't it? You've had someone working above the bath who's dropped something, dropped a screwdriver or whatever, and caused the damage, and then taken their money and walked away quietly." And obviously, you know, again, it's a pain when these sort of things happen. But if you don't own up to it, well, that's a customer you're never going to get back again, isn't it? And that's a way to spoil your reputation and attract some bad reviews and all that kind of horribleness.
And I suppose as a customer, if you have someone you've hired to do a job own up to a mistake, you're probably going to trust that person more to get back for future jobs.
Yeah, even if you end up out of pocket from it, that you've got to take away the positives. There are always going to be negative experiences out on site, and you're never going to have every job going 100% smoothly. So when something does go sour, you've always got to take something positive from it, I think. And that may be that, yes, as you say, you come across as honest, and at least you get perhaps repeat custom or a good review out of it, or some kind of positive feedback that helps to promote your image. But also it helps you to work out, well, how have I been caught out this time? What's gone wrong, and how can I avoid that happening in the future? And it may be that you do two things. It may be that you bump up your terms and conditions, say, to try and cover yourself from being in that position in the future.
So let's talk about mistakes that you often see on site that aren't necessarily yours, that you might be there to address. Are there common ones that you come across?
Mistakes on sites, not so many from other electricians, although there are things that you come across occasionally where you think, "Oh, that needs sorting out." It's usually mistakes from DIYers, of course, who've put something in that in no sort of way meets how things are supposed to be done, and that you've got to put right. I think the worst places to work on are the ones where you've had someone who has some knowledge, but not necessarily the requisite amount, or doesn't have the requisite skills perhaps to pull it off. I think the worst place I worked, the guy said to me, "Oh, you'll be all right here," because this was my father's house and he was an electrical engineer. And this guy may have been dynamite on paper, but his tool work left a lot to be desired. And the thing is with that, yes, he had stuff in there that he'd managed to get working, and you know, electrically it worked, but the way it was done was one of the worst I've ever seen, with exposed cores, exposed live parts, junction boxes off, spidering off junction boxes all over the place, undersized cabling. It was all a case of it had been thrown in. So it was obviously, it may have been very good as an electrical engineer on paper and in the theoretical side of it, but he just wasn't practical on the tools. And the stuff that he put in, yes, it functioned, but it was in no way safe. And although it functioned normally, when things were normal, it's how it would function in the event of a fault that would be the likely where problems would likely land. And of course, you're then in a position where you're trying to sort of, well, to straighten all that out is very difficult.
How do you have that conversation with a customer to say, not only could it be things that they don't necessarily see as wrong, but to tell them that someone they're close to has done it wrong, and you've got to fix that without sounding it like you're trying to rip them off?
It's tricky, isn't it? It's a very difficult thing to do, and yes, all you can do really is list what the problems are and hope that the client doesn't think you're trying to rinse them for unnecessary work. You don't want to sound like the guy who's turned up sucking air through his teeth. But you know, that's sometimes you don't have any choice. You turn up and you're faced with a situation not of your making, where things are pretty horrendous, and you've got to break that bad news. I had another one quite recently where people have moved into a new house, and again, you know, you think a house purchase is going to be the biggest purchase you're ever likely to make. You wouldn't buy a car without having an MOT on it or something, but people will buy a house without first having it fully inspected and tested, which seems a bit crazy to me, because you ought to be in a position to know what it is you're getting into. And there was a recent customer of ours that bought a place. We turned up to do an EICR on it, and it was just problem after problem. And again, it was all down to the fact that the previous owners, over the course of perhaps sort of 30, 40 years, had all made their own modifications and alterations, and in a way that was so badly done. And things that you wouldn't necessarily see as the new owners. For example, you had sockets without earthing. You wouldn't know that there was a problem there necessarily if you plug something into it and it worked. Metal light fittings without earthing. Again, you know, you turn the light on, it works. So you're there saying to them, well, that's not right, and the problem is going to manifest itself not under normal operation, but if there's ever a fault on there. Other things as well, exposed cores, undersized wiring, again, junctions off junctions off junctions. Some of it you can physically point to, take pictures of, and say, well, look, you can see that's bad. The workmanship there looks bad. Or you can see that this circuit is tripping off. You know, you don't need me to point out that's not right. But then it's usually things like poor insulation resistance and missing earthing. That's the tough one to get across to the customer, because their perception is, well, at the moment it's working fine. Yes, but that's not going to stay that way forever. And in the event of a fault, that very thing that's supposed to save you is missing. It's tricky, but all you can do is be as verbose as you can in listing out what the problems are, and try to evidence it with photographs if you can. But yeah, it's a tricky one. It can be awkward. But of course, it's not my position to condemn anyone's electrics or to disconnect something and say, right, you can't turn that back on because I deem it to be too dangerous, because I don't have those sort of powers. All I can do to cover myself is to list what is wrong, what I don't like, quote specific regulations if I can as to why it's wrong. Again, show photographs and put the ball back in the customer's court and say, right, it's your liability. You want to carry on living like this, using this, have your family living around this, whatever. That's entirely up to you. It's the most I can do is to say, well, we have these problems, and it's up to you to sort them out. But I'm confident enough, if I come up with these sort of things, that I can say, right, you can take those findings and you can get other quotes from other Sparkies. I'm not here saying only I can do this work.
Yeah,
we're quite free to shop around and to get second opinions or whatever, especially on things like EICRs we performed. So it's not something where what might say is the be all and end all and only I can sort it out. It's a case of you want someone out, and most of the time I don't want to fix the damn faults. Sometimes some of these houses, it's just such a can of worms. You think, oh crikey, I could be bashing my head against this for a week and there could still be a list of problems on here. And there are some things that I'm just never going to be able to find, because and a lot of these sort of installations where you've got these sort of modifications done by ham-fisted homeowners over the years, often it's all buried under floors or whatever, and unless you start ripping up carpets and knocking holes in walls, you're just not going to get to the problem part. So you're trying to work around it as much as you can, and sometimes it's just more trouble than it's worth. And sometimes I just say, look, I'm not really interested in the remedials. Here are the problems.
Yeah,
you can find someone else to go ticking them off the list.
I suppose for people, I mean, like you say, you might not want to get into doing that kind of rework, but for Sparkies out there who do, what you're saying is quite a good method, really, of saying, look, these are the faults, these are the regs. You don't have to use me. Feel free to go around. I'm sure the next Sparky to come along will probably tell you the same. And again, that's probably a good trust builder for that customer.
Yeah, well, I mean, there shouldn't be anything. Things like condition reports, if you're confident that you're doing them diligently and that you're not one of these fly-by-nighters out to fleece the customers, then you ought to be able to stand by your report. And you shouldn't be afraid of scrutiny upon it. So if the homeowner's paid for that report, they can do what they like with it. It's not, even if I author an EICR, I can't say to the homeowner, well, don't go showing it to anyone else, or it's their property once they've paid for it. They can do what they like with it. They can choose to ignore it, or they can use it as a basis for seeking alternative quotes for remedials or whatever. It's outside of my control once they've got it. And so long as I can justify what I've put on there, then that ought to be fine. There's nothing that I should be afraid of. That I shouldn't be scared that they're going to go to another Sparky and he's going to go, oh, this guy's talking out of his hat. You don't need to do this at all. Or what he said here about this passing is nonsense. This doesn't pass. This work needs doing. You know, I'm quite happy to sort of toe-to-toe with them and say, well, here's why I've coded these things the way they are, or why I've said what I perhaps don't like about this particular installation. And so long as I can argue those points, that's fine. And obviously the best way to argue those points are things like being able to take a specific regulation and say, well, here it is in black and white, and that obviously isn't applying to how it's been done here.
Have you ever been caught out from giving a quote, well, not necessarily a quote, but quoting time at least, knowing that you've got other jobs planned in your diary, thinking, right, I've got X amount of time, days, hours to do this job, and you found a can of worms, like you said, and that has had a knock-on effect?
Yeah, I mean, scheduling is perhaps one of the more difficult aspects of the job, scheduling and billing. I always feel like I'm not billing the right amount, but scheduling is something that it's almost impossible to feel like you get it right. A lot of tradespeople, I feel, oversubscribe their days and try to fit too much in, and that leaves them with no wiggle room. So if the job at the start of the day goes sour, that has a knock-on effect throughout the rest of the day. And I'm always on site with my builder or whatever, and he's always swearing about the plumbers, or usually the plumbers actually, because they haven't turned up, and they were supposed to turn up, and then they speak to the plumber, and the plumber is on another job that's overrunning and isn't going to get there on time. The plumber ends up working until stupid o'clock at night, and you can't. It's very difficult to run a business like that because it's very stressful. You can't plan your day properly, and you will end up caught short. And I've been caught short in the past. I've had my fair share of turning up at 6 o'clock at night to start a job which I thought I'd be on by 2 o'clock in the afternoon or whatever. And we all have those days. Very few and far between now. It very rarely happens now because Nigel and I don't oversubscribe our days anymore. We undersubscribe it, if anything, which means that we don't necessarily get as much as we can out of any given day. We perhaps sometimes knock off early, but that's fine by us. We're not out to we're not out to get rich anymore. We want an easy day of it if we can. And I think you've got to allow a bit of slush room, and we allow slush room in the week as well as in the day. So we might have a number of fixed bookings, but there's also chunks of the week where we haven't booked anything in because there's always something on the back burner. Or at least for us now, not so much in the early days when work was harder to come by, but now there's so much coming in. We always have those small jobs on the back burner where you've got perhaps a retired couple who want some lights putting up or something like that. There's no urgency there. You know they're there sort of 5 days a week. So you can pretty much pick up the phone to them anytime and say, right, okay, we're going to come over and do your job now. If you find you've got a window to undertake it. But by the same token, if you're doing one of your fixed booking jobs and you find that it's not going according to plan and it is overrunning, then you use that extra time to take on that aspect. And it's very difficult to find that sort of balance, but by undersubscribing ourselves, that's the way we do it. And we say to a lot of people, well, rather than give you a fixed booking, if it's okay with you, we'll play it by ear, and then we'll try and turn up sort of in the next couple of weeks or whatever. If it's a small job, just to sort of undertake it in a informal fashion, if you like, or 11th hour notice, which is fine if people are around and are happy for you to do that. There's usually enough jobs in the week where we can do that.
And I guess if you do oversubscribe your time, that's when mistakes can get made. It's the same for any job. If you're feeling the stress, that's when you're gonna make errors. No matter how good you are at that job, it's going to happen, I suppose, isn't it?
Absolutely, and that's the last thing you want, is to feel like you're under pressure to get a job done. I absolutely hate that when you're, because obviously you want to give your time to the client and to see through the job from beginning to end in as diligent a fashion as you can. The last thing you want is to feel like you've got to rush something, or heaven forbid cut corners or anything like that, just to try and speed things along. So we don't want to do that, and we are quite lazy, Nigel and I, which is great for our customers in a way, because it means that usually when we undertake work, we're doing it at a decent pace, and at the end of it, we like to think that we've put something in that the customer is happy with. Certainly we don't get any complaints. The customer is happy with, they're happy to pay for, they can see that the work's been done to a standard that they're pleased with. We haven't felt like we've sort of had to break into too much of a panic in order to achieve that. And yes, it makes it difficult to plan your day sometimes, because sometimes you end up finishing earlier than you'd like. Sometimes you end up finishing a little bit later than you'd like. But it's, as Nigel always says, it's a swings and roundabouts thing, and it usually sort of balances out, so long as we're not in a situation where we're really in a panic. And usually we're not, because we have that in a week.
Have you ever had the same sort of issue with quotes? I know there's a difference between quotes and estimates, but if you've given a customer a concrete quote for a job, have you ever been caught out where it's through no fault of your own, there might be a can of worms underneath the floorboards, but it's impacted your job to go over budget, and that might have to come out of your pocket?
No, because I don't give quotes.
Okay.
The only time I give a quote, which is very rare, is, for example, if it was a place that I'd rewired, so I absolutely knew the installation and what needed to be done in order to achieve the job. For everything else, it's always an estimate. And I try, and the estimates always have a list of assumptions and observations attached to them, because, as you say, you don't know what's under the floor. And I don't want to turn up to a job and find something unexpected, which means it's going to take longer than I anticipated, which perhaps could have been foreseen. For example, all my estimates, my written estimates, all have an assumptions and observations section, and it will say things like, I assume that the circuit I'm modifying is fit for purpose and has no pre-existing faults that need attention. And I assume that, for example, if it's something where I have to go into the attic, I assume that the attic isn't boarded, I can access the cables, isn't full of junk, hasn't got rodents in there, hasn't got insects, or anything that's going to make it so that it makes it more difficult for me to do the job. Because you unless you know the property you're going into, you can't say 100% that what the environment's going to be like and what you're going to come across. So the estimate will list a bunch of assumptions and observations specifically tailored to that job. I mean, they're all sort of off the shelf ones. You just sort of say, right, well, okay, I'm going to be working in an attic on this one, so let's get the attic ones and we'll put them in the thing. And then there are certain ones that appear on all of them, like, I assume your circuit that I'm modifying is fit for purpose and doesn't have any pre-existing faults. And obviously you move on in that same paperwork to say, if anything crops up that does need additional time or materials, they'll be accounted for on top of what's been allowed for in the estimate to do the job. Or I'll speak to you about the consequences, because there may be a job that we turn up and like, well, we can't do this because, you know, things are this bad or whatever. And there was one, for example, where we couldn't get into the attic because there was a wasp's nest in there. So obviously we couldn't undertake the work until the client had got the exterminators in to deal with them.
See, I'd let you off with that one, but when you said to me that, in case there's spiders up there, does that, are you telling me you're scared of spiders, Dave?
No, not spiders. When I say insects, anything that may get in your way. So when I say insects, I was doing things like wasps, bees. There was on a few weeks ago where they had this horrible fly infestation. I was like, and I just had to sort of get on with it, really, because I was like, well, I've got to get this job done. I have to rob this cable through this attic with all these flies.
Yeah.
But there are ones where you have to leave yourself that get out clause, if you like, where you look at it and say, I'm not happy to do this. You may say that from a health and safety point of view, depending on certain aspects of the environment you find yourself in, or it may not be straight health and safety. It might just be unpleasant. It might just be something, a place that's physically not where you want to be.
Yeah.
For whatever reason, because you feel that it's not suitable for you to be working in. You have to have those clauses in your terms and conditions to say, well, I reserve the right to walk away from this one until the environment has been changed to my satisfaction.
And that comes with experience of managing yourself and your time, I guess, isn't it? Where someone maybe new to the industry might not know how to write an estimate with those kind of clauses in that would protect themselves.
So when it comes to so obviously you've got your terms and conditions, which you put in to cover yourself, but you were saying earlier about when you come across negative experiences on site, you've got to take something from that, and as well, you can use it obviously to beef up your terms and conditions on your estimates, and it's best to stick to estimates unless you absolutely know the environment you're going into, the installation you're going into, perhaps because you were the one who put it in, and therefore you're in a position where you know exactly what kind of walls you're dealing with, you know where the wiring is, you know what kind of circuit it is, and you know how you're going to do that job. And it's always an estimate, and you leave certain elements of it open-ended in order to protect yourself from that position, finding yourself in that position where you may get caught out. And you've also, and if you do get caught out, you've also got to take a positive experience from that.
Learn from it. Yeah,
learn from it, exactly. Don't let it drag you down. It might have cost you something, as indeed it had with me with that job earlier where I had to pay for a plasterer, I had to pay for a hob, but you can use that to beef up your terms and conditions to say, well, how am I not going to get caught out by this again? What can I put in writing for future jobs to make sure I don't get caught out by this again?
Get a better labourer.
Yeah, well, yeah. So yeah, stuff like that. As an example of that, I can give you another example actually where there was damage caused on site, which wasn't really our fault. We had a job where he wanted us to fit something into his bathroom ceiling. It was one of these heater, ventilator, light unit things. It was quite a bit of kit as it went. So we had to put in some battling in the attic to take the weight of it and all that sort of stuff. Not that it was heavy, it was just the physical bulk of the thing. Anyway, I digress. We got to site and he said, oh, you can use my loft ladder to get up and down. And he had one of these ones that you open the hatch and pull the ladder down. Obviously that ladder comes down. There's only a certain footprint of space it's going to fit into on the landing floor. But we used it to trundle up and down and to do our work. And then at the end of the day, we got a message say, well, the ladder's damaged my floor. It's gone because his floorboards were a bit rotten, and one of the feet of the ladder had actually pushed through the side of one of the planks on the floorboard of the landing. And I did offer to sort of help him out with that, but I did say to him, well, look, you gave us the permission to use your ladder, and we've just used it for scrambling up and down into the attic. And it's reasonable for us to expect that your ladder and your floor are going to do their thing and operate properly. You know, it's not like we've misused the ladder in some kind of way, and it's not like we had any choice about where on the floor it could go. If his floorboards are too rotten for his ladder, that's not really our fault. So that was a an opportunity there to beef up our T's and C's from that point on to say, if there's access required anywhere, we're going to use our own access equipment, not yours. But if you do say that we can use yours, then we expect it to be in a serviceable condition, that we can use it in a reasonable manner, and that any damage or problems that it occurred from it aren't our fault. If you're given your permission to use your stuff on your site, it's something that takes it outside of our control. So you've got to take something positive from these negative experiences. He was fine with it. That particular chap, he was like, no, I completely understand. But I did actually offer to say, well, look, maybe I can do something to help you. I don't know what I'd have done, to be fair, with a rotten floor, but he was all right with it. But and again, it's one of those where you've just got to be sort of honest with it and
learn from it and just own up to it. Yeah. Well, even like that, like you say, you're not necessarily owning up to that, but you're going out of your way to help that customer at the end of the day.
Yeah, I don't want anybody to feel like they regret hiring us.
Yeah,
they've hired us, then you want them to go away thinking, oh, those guys did a good job, because obviously there is the opportunity for repeat custom, for good word of mouth, for positive reviews or whatever, and those are all the things you want. Those are all the things that help business and keep your business ticking over. What you don't want is someone seething away because they feel that you've done them over in some kind of way, and that they wish they'd never had you in because you've left them with some damage or whatever. Now, if I do some damage, like I say, I'll own up to that.
Yeah. Whilst we're on the subject of time and making mistakes, have you ever had faulty equipment? Now, without going into brands, because there's lots of brands out there and we don't want to be naming names, have there been instances where you've been let down by equipment that you're installing that has impacted your time?
In terms, it depends what you mean by equipment. In terms of tools, for example, not particularly. Obviously, we all experience tool failures. It doesn't impact us too terribly because both Nigel and I have our own separate toolboxes, our own separate power tools, and we have more than one of pretty much everything. So if something does die on site, we usually have some means of backup, in multiple drills, for example, mains powered and battery powered. We always have at least two testers on the van, so if one of them runs out of charge or has some kind of problem, there's the other one to fall back on. So there are examples of tools that have failed perhaps too prematurely. Again, like you're saying, without getting into brands, I've had a drill that packed up after 4 months. My multi-saw failed much quicker than it ought to have done, and yes, at the time it happens, you jump up and down and swear, and you have to take it back and throw it back at your wholesaler or whatever.
Yeah. So I once lost my temper with a coping saw that snapped and threw it into a pond. That was a good accomplishment. That was. Retrieving it out of the pond wasn't as much fun though.
Yeah. I can imagine.
Yeah.
Good thing to go fishing for. In terms of consumables, yeah, we're let down all the time by LED products.
Okay.
From big brands as well. I mean, obviously, LED lighting, especially, LED lighting has always been fairly problematic since the early days. But you expect big brands to have settled down by now and to have got a grip of it by now, and yet there are still brands we buy where their integrated lights fail prematurely, or you buy a big name brand for, say, a GU10 lamp thinking that'll be all right, and then I was just out yesterday changing some out on a site because a couple of them have failed there, and this is a big international brand that I put in. And you think, well, you should be safe with these things.
One thing I wanted to ask you, we see a lot on social media, whether that's Instagram or Facebook, of other Sparkies criticising other Sparkies installs. Some of it might be constructive criticism. I've had instances where electricians who have been on the show have said they've had other electricians private message them and say, in a quite a positive manner, you know, love the stuff you're putting on Instagram, but I noticed you could have done this better. Here's how I would have done it. And I think that's great. That is definitely constructive criticism. But have you ever experienced just downright trolling from other Sparkies or people who aren't Sparkies, I should say?
Yeah, everybody has. Anybody who puts their work up for show can expect somebody somewhere to come back with some criticism. Now, as you say, positive criticism is fine. I mean, I'm certainly don't claim to be the best electrician out there or anything like that. I'm as fallible as anybody else, and there may will be instances where I put something up where it's downright wrong because I cocked up, because everyone's fallible. And there have certainly been stuff that I've done in videos where people have said, "Oh, you should have done it like that," or "You could have done it like that." And it's not necessarily that it's wrong sometimes, or that there's just a better alternative way of doing it, or you know, but yes, that there have been some who I don't tend to get them so much anymore, but there have been some who are downright nasty about it. And of course, the worst ones, well, they never show any work of their own. It's very easy, I think, to be critical of other people's work if you're not putting yourself out there. And you've got to be careful, I think, as well, because I know of one guy who was very vocal across channels about other people's work, and then decided he was going to have a crack at his own YouTube channel. And, you know, you've got to be careful then that it doesn't come back to bite you, because if you've created some bad blood amongst other people who are doing that sort of thing, and then you think, oh, you know, I'm gonna have a go at this myself, it can lead to you being on the receiving end. Personally, I don't put in any criticism. I don't think I do anyway. There may be the odd social media argument I might chime in with my 2 penneth on, but usually it's already a discussion that's ongoing, and you've got two sides arguing or whatever, and I might say, well, here's my interpretation of it, or here's what I think. Doesn't mean I'm right. I'm no kind of industry expert or anything like that. I'm just another guy with the same access to the materials as everyone else, and an opinion sometimes, and that may be right or wrong. Have you ever found these comments has affected your confidence, whether that's positively or negatively? Yeah, as people have said on I think on SGTV and on other channels as well before, it's always the negative ones that really stick. And sometimes you just think, oh, why am I bothering? It's just not, it's more trouble than it's worth. And there are some days where you wake up and think, why do I even keep these channels open? Why don't I just delete them? Things like Twitter, YouTube, Instagram, etc. Why even have them there? Because sometimes they just attract the wrong attention, or you just can't be arsed with it. You know, it's just, sometimes it just seems like too much like hard work for the return, and the return is pretty pathetic. Most people don't do this for the money. A lot of them, they do it because it's a subject they enjoy and they want to talk about and show off and so forth, isn't it? This is yeah. If I put a video out there, it's to say something, and usually what I'm saying is what a lot of other people are thinking, and perhaps just want to see someone air the same sort of opinions as themselves. And it's a good way of getting stuff off your chest. Otherwise, it would drive you potty if it were bouncing around in your head and you felt like you wanted to air something and you didn't have the opportunity. But the original intention behind social media channels for the business was just another means of advertising, another means of saying, look, here's who I am and what I do. And obviously, in my particular case, things are perhaps a little more skewed because I'm usually quite rude. and drunk, and you know, there are people who will go, oh, I'm not hiring that guy, but which is fine. But
But most of us can relate, so that's where it comes in.
well, you know, you may there's I don't it's never going to put off. I think I'm safe because I've got quite a wide client base who don't care whether I'm on YouTube or not, and they know my work and trust it, and know what sort of charges the prices I charge, etc., and are happy to have me in. They know I'm not going to be really drunk on their site or swearing in front of their kids or anything like that. It's they know that they can trust to have the job done. Or their partner firms like my builder or whatever, he doesn't care, does he? If he just wants to, he knows that he can trust me to turn up at 9 o'clock one day and get the job done, and that's what he's interested in. So yes, it started off as a way to advertise, and it still works that way. I get queries coming in, people saying, I've seen you on YouTube and I want YouTube as well. I had to get them from all over the country, and it's like, no, you're all right.
Yeah. Not going to North Yorkshire to do a job when I'm down here, sort of thing.
Well, yeah, I mean, and that's the thing, isn't it? When you've got enough on the doorstep, there's no need to be travelling too far afield. And people say, "Oh, we'll pay your travel time, whatever." And it's like, yeah, but who needs it, you know?
Yeah. Dave, I want to thank you for coming on the show. Hope people out there found this interesting. If people out there do have some good mistakes they've come across, or even ones they're willing to admit to, then put them in the comments section. It'd be interesting to read some of them. I want to thank you all again for watching, and we'll see you next time.